A tour bus was traveling along a mountain road. On the left side, a cliff stood tall. On the right side, a steep drop covered in thick green plants stretched far below. Inside the bus, students made their usual noise. Some teased the teachers, some sang songs loudly, others laughed at jokes. It was a normal trip on a normal day. Then it happened suddenly, as many scary things do. The brakes failed. The driver panicked and tried to control the bus, but it was already too late. The bus went off the road and crashed into the rocks and thick greenery below. It became a tragic accident. 21 students from Midorishino High School, along with a teacher, the driver and a tour guide, died instantly. Soon after, some weird entities started calling out to someone named Endo Guy. They looked strange and unclear, like a dream that was about to fade. Guy slowly tried to open his eyes. A rough voice called him Buddy and told him it was time to wake up. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. At that moment, fear rushed through him. He quickly moved back and hit a rough tree trunk behind him. Real monsters stood around him, watching him closely. The closest one was a girl. The lower part of her body looked like a spider. She had thin antennae on her head and sharp ears. She placed a finger on her lips and told him to be quiet because his voice was too loud. Floating beside her was a large black eye with tentacles. He sounded annoyed and told him to get used to the situation. Nearby, a skeleton took a few heavy steps and said that their rest was over. It was time to move. Guy frowned but nodded. He stood up quietly along with the others. They walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down. Below was a small, peaceful-looking village. Meanwhile, in the village below, things were not quiet at all. The villagers were forced out of their homes and pushed into the town square without any explanation. A Viking-looking man, Akabane, stepped forward. He was a heavy man with a thick red beard and long messy hair tied back with a leather strap. He wore leather armor with metal plates and carried a heavy axe. He loudly asked if everyone was already gathered. The soldiers quickly answered that everyone was there and pointed at the crowd. Akabane let out a breath and said that was good. He stepped forward and spoke in a loud voice, telling the villagers to listen carefully because he would not repeat himself. He explained that their group was a monster extermination squad sent by the Holy Kingdom. He said the village was very fortunate. A monster crystal had appeared in an abandoned church nearby, and a powerful monster could break free at any time. When that happened, their squad would be ready. Because of this, he said the villagers should have felt grateful for the mercy of the Holy Army. An old man slowly stepped out of the crowd. He leaned on a cane and quietly thanked them for their protection. They had truly been very worried. Akabane brushed it off as if it did not matter. With a proud smile, he announced that the village's supplies and several houses would be taken for the army's needs. He ordered them to bring all the food at once. The old man stumbled. He could not believe what he had just heard and asked if Akabane had just said their houses and food. He stepped forward and grabbed the Viking's armor with shaking hands. He exclaimed that they had paid their taxes faithfully but still struggled to survive. Without food, they would starve during the winter. He cried out that they had nowhere else to go, that this was their ancestral land, and that leaving the village would only lead to death. The Viking shook off the old man's hands with clear contempt. He pointed a finger at the old man's face and said with a smirk that these actions were only temporary. The knights would deal with the monster and then leave. The old man did not stop. He exclaimed that they had nowhere else to go, and if they wandered off aimlessly, they would starve to death. Without warning, the Viking swung his axe and split the old man's skull in half while telling him to shut up. The villagers watched in shock, and a few people rushed forward. They checked on the old man and asked if their grandfather was still alive, but there was no answer. Akabane stayed where he stood. He pretended to wipe away tears and claimed that God's revelation had sent them. He questioned how such insignificant people could dare to go against that divine will. He looked over the crowd, which had gone silent in fear, and mocked them by asking if they also held rebellious thoughts. The villagers quickly shook their heads left and right. Akabane complained that these simple people lacked education and proper upbringing. He then turned to his subordinates. They clapped nervously and nodded together, agreeing that their lord was right. Akabane loudly proclaimed again that they were brave warriors of the Holy Kingdom. He ordered the villagers to hurry with the food. Suddenly, a strange noise came from the nearby woods. The Viking quickly turned and reached for his axe. From the woods, a skeleton wearing some light armor appeared. Its empty mouth hung open, and its arms stretched forward as it slowly moved toward the living. Akabane looked at it without much concern. He asked his men if they could handle it. The soldiers looked at each other with mocking smiles and nodded with confidence. At the same time, the villagers quietly and hesitantly carried the supplies with their heads down. The Viking watched them and muttered that the villagers were getting on his nerves. When he heard a dying scream behind him, he turned around again. The two soldiers who had just claimed they could handle the skeleton were now lying on the ground. They were either unconscious or already dead. The skeleton suddenly spoke with clear sarcasm and said the situation was ridiculous. The soldiers had failed to protect the weak. In fact, they were weak themselves. After a short pause, it said that they don't need such a god. It raised its fists and declared that those who only pretended to be faithful would be punished. They would face true divine judgment of death. The Viking and the remaining soldiers gasped in shock when they saw the skeleton speaking. If it could speak, they assumed it had to be a special kind of monster. They realized it was a sealed monster. In another part of the village, the soldiers looked at each other as they listened to the noise coming from the gate. They felt nervous. Captain Stringer walked up to them. He rested his sword on his shoulder and looked at his men with a serious expression. He told them to get a grip on themselves. They were the honorable cavalry squad of the Holy Kingdom. There was no place for fear. Anyone who made an unnecessary sound would be punished by him. The soldiers quietly said they understood. They picked up their weapons and moved out to scout the area. One of the soldiers who stayed behind said that something felt off. There had been no signs of movement near the abandoned church. The captain simply shrugged. He said that Hadamon was likely throwing another one of his angry fits. He felt annoyed by the man's lack of control. At the same time, as the scouts go through an arch gate, they suddenly feel their feet sink into a thick and strange sludge on the road. Their legs grew heavy and they could not move properly. A spider girl dropped down from the bridge above them and laughed. She happily called them her prey. The soldiers shouted that she was a monster and said she looked like an insect. The spider girl let out a thin mist and calmly said she would not allow them to enter the village. The soldiers tried to order an attack with their spears, but they could not move. Thin strands of spider silk had already wrapped around their necks. The threads were hard to see. The spider girl claimed this was called the guillotine silk. It was not sharp, but it tightened the more the victims struggled. The more they struggled, the harder it became to breathe, and soon they would all be pulled into suffocation. She posed a V sign with her hand like she was doing a selfie with her victims hanging on the arch gate. She looked up at the moon above the village and quietly hoped that her companions were doing well. Meanwhile, some priests cast purification magic on the skeleton. A bright light covered the skeleton and it disappeared. They celebrated, assuming they won, but in the very next moment the skeleton appeared behind them. With one wide swing it cut off all their heads at once. It did not speak. It did not hesitate. Hadamon was shocked. He wondered why the purification spell meant for the undead didn't work on the skeleton. The monster glared at him in silence. The Viking laughed and asked the skeleton if it felt powerful just because it defeated weaklings. He grabbed both of his axes and rushed forward. He used a skill that let him throw consecutive strikes. Blow after blow fell on the skeleton, giving it no time to react. The skeleton screamed out loud and then broke apart into a pile of bones. The Viking laughed loudly. He exclaimed that a mere sealed monster would be no match against a transcendent blessed by God. In this world, there were people called blessed. They possessed overwhelming power and were basically the elite rulers of the world. Most of them, the captains in the army, had abilities. Not knowing one's gift would be quite problematic. Hadamon then ordered his men to move and regroup, but the soldiers suddenly told him to check behind him. Even though it was undead, the skeleton had its own blessed ability. It had once been just a pile of bones, but it rebuilt itself and stood up again as if nothing had happened. The soldiers watched in fear. The Viking rushed forward again. He planned to keep attacking until the monster was fully destroyed. The skeleton stayed calm and blocked every strike with its hands, stopping each blow with ease. Then it spoke in a tired voice and said it had lost interest in Hadamon. It continued to block every attack without effort. After that, it declared that it was already over for the Viking. In the next moment, it struck. It pierced through the large Viking like a spear. Using its technique, Life-Reaping Scythe, it tore the Viking's heart out of his chest. On his last breath, Hadamon asked who the skeleton was. The skeleton told him that he was already dead, then crushed his heart without hesitation. Hadamon fell to the ground and died. The skeleton looked up at the night sky and said the moon was beautiful. He believed it was a sign that victory was coming. He then hoped that everything was going well for the others. Meanwhile, in the abandoned church, Captain Stringer grew impatient and asked if the messenger had not returned yet. A commotion broke out outside and he angrily ordered the soldiers to be stricter with the villagers. If they refused to obey, the soldiers would kill the children they had taken as hostages. Stringer walked up to the crystal that held a sealed monster and stared at its cold, flickering light. He fell deep in thought. Lately, more of these crystals had been appearing, and the creatures inside them were always strong specimens. This was the reason the Holy Army existed. This was why the people should have felt grateful. If not, a great disaster would have come upon them. Behind him, Guy appeared without making a sound. He gave a quiet but serious warning that the man must not touch the crystal with his dirty hands. The captain quickly turned around and swung his sword, demanding to know who he was. The young man easily dodged the attack and jumped back. Then he leaned against a tree as if he had just been passing by. The soldiers became angry and confused. They wondered how he got there and where he came from. The soldiers quickly surrounded Guy in a tight circle and demanded answers. They asked who he was and what he was doing there. The young man gave a small smirk and asked if they were part of the Holy Kingdom's army. If they were, he told them they needed to leave because they were standing on his side's land. One of the soldiers said he did not look like a normal villager. The captain, growing impatient, asked what he knew about the crystal. Guy gave a small laugh, closed his eyes, and calmly said the captain should have been worried about something else. The soldiers grew furious. They could not believe he was making fun of the Holy Army. They rushed forward to capture him. Guy shouted that it was time and called for his comrade Diane. The ground beneath them cracked with a loud roar and the stone broke apart. A huge stone golem rose from below, slowly standing up to its full height. Guy was already standing on its back. Stringer felt confused and wondered why a golem had appeared out of nowhere. Guy told Diane to attack. The golem stretched out its arms and moved forward slowly. Like something very heavy, the ground shook under its steps. Stringer cursed and quickly ordered the soldiers to change formation. He sent out the magic squad to stop the monster. The golem attacked. Large pieces of stone flew through the air. Waves of rock rolled across the ground with a loud crash, knocking soldiers down and throwing them aside like dolls. The captain refused to step back and shouted for them to hold their ground, but his voice was lost in the noise. The soldiers who could still move rushed in and tried to stab the golem with swords and spears, but nothing worked. Their weapons bounced off without leaving a mark. They shouted that the golem's body was too strong, then ran in fear. Stringer scoffed and let the frightened soldiers run. He ordered the magic squad to attack again. The mages stepped forward, focused, and cast a freezing spell. The golem slowed down and then froze in place, covered in ice. Everyone looked at each other in surprise. No one expected the spell to work. The captain ran forward with a confident look and said things were going as planned. He swung his sword with great force and cut off one of the golem's legs in one strike. The giant lost its balance and fell to the ground with a loud crash. Stringer laughed loudly. The golem was no match for his sword. He exclaimed that a body like that could not stand against God's blessing. He lifted his weapon again, ready to strike once more. Suddenly, a large black flying eye with tentacles appeared out of nowhere and stopped him. The creature opened its mouth and cast a strange magical spell. At once the captain found that he could not move at all. At the same time, Guy climbed onto the crystal and looked down at his frozen opponent. He quietly said that the man had been caught. A moment later, he raised his sword and jumped down, but an explosion went off right in front of him. Stringer's subordinates quickly used a healing spell which quickly removed the paralysis. The captain swung his sword hard, but the attack barely missed. The golem behind him asked if he needed help. The eye monster mocked him, asking if he would really let his target escape. Guy easily avoided the attack and shook his head. He told his allies to deal with the remaining soldiers. Stringer tightened his grip on his sword. He realized it was not just his imagination. The young man was truly working with the monsters. He wondered if Guy was connected to the recent attacks. Even so, the Holy Army could not let him escape alive. The captain rushed forward with his sword, pointing at Guy. However, he suddenly gave a small smirk. He then pulled back his sword and thrust his other hand forward. He cast a fireball without warning. Guy barely avoided it at the last second and felt frustrated. He was shocked to see him use magic. Stringer felt pleased with himself. This was his special move. He would pretend he could not use magic. When his enemy lowered their guard and thought they were safe, he would attack with magic and finish them off with the sword when they dodged. But this time something went wrong. His attack pattern had been perfect, and avoiding it should have been impossible. Yet Guy still escaped the magic attack, and even dodged his surprise sword/fen. The captain began swinging his sword again and again without stopping. Guy avoided every strike. He ducked under the blade, stepped to the side, and even flipped through the air with ease. Stringer then realized that Guy must have been using a blessing. Guy finally landed, let out a breath, and calmly said that he did not know the captain could use magic. The captain ignored him. He had never seen a blessing like this before. Still, if it only improved speed and movement, it was not a big problem. He spread his arms and cast several fireballs one after another. Guy grew nervous and ran, moving between the attacks. Stringer knew he had to finish this quickly. The monsters might return and that would make things harder. He also wanted to capture Guy alive. He cast a fireblade spell on his sword and charged after him. He did not care if he lost a limb or two as long as he could defeat Guy. The eye monster pointed its tentacle at the scene and anxiously said that their friend was under attack. The golem agreed with a grim look. After they dealt with the remaining soldiers, the monster told Diane to go ahead. Guy cursed quietly as he ran. He thought the captain was too stubborn to stop. He pulled throwing knives from under his cloak and believed that at this distance the captain would not have enough time to dodge. But Stringer easily parried all the knives with one swing of his sword. He shouted for the guy to stop. Guy cursed again in his mind. The captain kept getting closer and let out a small laugh. He was about to catch up. Guy did not watch where he was going, and a few seconds later he ran straight into a heavy locked door. It was a dead end. Stringer stopped a few meters away and slowly walked forward, lifting his sword with clear intent. Guy panicked and hit the door with the handle of his weapon, calling for anyone to open it. Behind him, the captain said in a cold tone that he would not escape this time. Guy turned around and told him not to come any closer. Stringer answered in a mocking way and told him to calm down. He said he did not plan to kill him yet. The fire on his blade would quickly cauterize any wound in an instant. With a wild look in his eyes, Stringer swung his sword. Guy shouted again for him to stay back. However, in an instant, Stringer found himself slammed against the door with a blade driven into his back. He did not understand what had just happened. He only realized he was pinned in place and could not move. Guy pushed harder on the weapon, forcing it deeper, and mockingly asked the old man for forgiveness. Stringer asked what Guy had just done. Guy did not explain and twisted the blade deeper. In the next moment the captain cast a spell on his fist, pulled the sword out of his back with a sharp motion and threw Guy aside. He lifted his sword and asked in a threatening way why the boy had been working with monsters that threatened their world. He also asked who he was and what he wanted. At that moment, a huge shadow appeared behind the captain. He barely had time to turn around. With one slow and steady move, the golem brought down a massive piece of a pillar and crushed him. Guy wiped the blood from his lip and laughed. He thanked his friend for doing a good job, then he explained the truth to his now dead enemy. It was simple, the monsters he was helping were his classmates. Suddenly, the villagers came out to meet them and clasped their hands in front of the monsters. Guy looked confused and asked his skeleton friend Lin what was happening. Lin shrugged. He said he already told the villagers not to thank them, but they still wanted to thank the knight who had saved them. Guy laughed and asked who the knight was. He also wondered why the villagers weren't scared of monsters. Just then he said nothing and walked quietly toward the crystal. His friends followed him. The eye monster crossed its tentacles and wondered who might be inside this time. Guy said it was impossible to tell from the outside. The spider girl jokingly suggested melting it to find out faster. Guy agreed. He thought about how he and his classmates were not accepted in this world. People called them sealed monsters and enemies of God. He knew that whoever was inside the crystal would be killed by the church as soon as they woke up. That was why they had fought and why they would keep fighting to stay alive. Guy held out his hand and touched the cold crystal. He used his ability called Liberation. The crystal broke into shining pieces and a dragon-like monster came out. The boy smiled warmly. He reached out his hand and welcomed the monster. It had arrived in a new world, where it would join the reborn high school students of Class 100. In a deserted corridor, the sound of heels clicked against the tall stone arches. A man walked calmly toward the locked doors where guards stood. He did not slow down. The guards greeted him by name, Colonel, and thanked him for his work at the border. He gave a short nod and said he wanted to meet the Pope. One of the guards allowed him to enter at once. The place was the Church of the Holy Kingdom of Belfine, Carolina. The man, who had long light hair, wore full armor and carried his helmet in one hand as he went inside. In the room, an old man lay on a bed. In a weak voice he asked if the visitor was Colonel and said he had been waiting. Colonel asked if he had woken him. The old man sighed, opened his eyes and looked at him with quiet satisfaction. King Panon gave a small nod and asked for a report in a soft voice. Colonel spoke clearly and said the mission was complete. Based on Lady Ashley's prophecy, the sealed monster in Gudo had been destroyed. Captain Stringer was on his way east to Nobilia. King Panon crossed his arms over the blanket and sighed. He said Colonel was as fast as always and that he was glad he had chosen him as his successor. He believed the kingdom would stay safe with him in charge. Colonel frowned when he heard this. The king noticed and asked what was wrong. Colonel explained that the monster had been very hard to defeat and that many soldiers had died. He lowered his head and his shoulders shook slightly. In a quieter voice he said he did not have the strength to match the king. King Panon laughed and said Colonel still lacked confidence. He explained that Colonel had already completed many hard missions and had defeated many monsters. Since being named as successor, he had faced many attacks and had won every time. The king said he truly believed Colonel was strong and worthy. Colonel stayed silent and looked away, unsure how to respond. The king watched him, then sighed. He surprised him by offering to train him. Colonel felt shocked and wondered if the king was serious. A nearby maid stepped in and reminded the king that he had not fought in over 30 years. She said he should not push himself. The old man laughed loudly and asked Colonel if he thought he had lost his mind. Colonel said no, but he sounded unsure. The king then suggested doing a short practice before going to sleep. He slowly raised his shaking hands and clapped softly. In the next moment, Colonel found himself in a different place. It was empty and endless, with no walls, no ceiling, and no solid ground. It was no longer the room or the church, it felt like nothing at all. He looked around in fear and wondered where he was and what was happening. The king suddenly laughed nearby and said that in that place he could fight with everything he had. He told Colonel to take his sword and forget that he was facing an old man. He wanted him to hold nothing back. Colonel quickly put on his helmet and looked around. He heard the old man's voice very close, but he could not see him anywhere. Worse, he could not sense him at all. It felt like no one else was there. The king noticed his hesitation and said he would attack first. In the next moment, a hand grabbed Colonel's leg. He reacted too late. The grip was very strong. The hand swung him around with ease, then suddenly let go and threw him several meters away. He hit the ground hard and slid across the smooth surface. Before Colonel could stand, the king slowly rose from the same spot where the hand had appeared. A bed rose with him and stood upright, as if it were normal. Colonel forced himself to stand and tried to catch his breath as he looked at the old man. The king floated in front of him, calm and light, as if nothing had happened. Colonel found it hard to believe. He thought the old man had already left the battlefield after becoming bedridden. King Panon had once been known as the strongest warrior chosen by the heavens. People said that 70 years ago he defeated the 7 ruling dragons by himself. It always sounded like a legend, but now, standing before him, Colonel realized it was true. The old man's power felt terrifying. Colonel stood still, shocked and confused. The old man then split his body into several copies. They moved to both sides, and each one looked real. Soon they surrounded Colonel from every direction. They all moved at the same time as if they were one. They clasped their hands like they were praying and began to laugh. Then they cast a spell that created a ring of fire around him. Flames rose high and blocked every escape. Colonel stayed in his stance and watched carefully. It was a perfect trap. King Panin cast another spell called Spectral King's Fall. Colonel raised his sword and prepared. A loud howl grew above him. He looked up and saw a massive swarm of spirits forming a giant ball that rushed down like a meteor. There were thousands, maybe tens of thousands. The old man warned him to be careful, saying the spirits would crush him. Colonel raised his left hand and activated the Imperial Shield, multiplying it 5 times. Then King Panin waved his hand. The swarm of spirits suddenly stopped just 1 meter above Colonel's head. A long sharp nail grew from the old man's finger. He said it was a pity and lightly stabbed Colonel in the neck. Colonel gasped, his eyes widening. At that moment, all the spirits disappeared. It was unclear what had happened. Then he lost consciousness. Colonel woke up on a soft bed inside the church he knew well. He felt confused and tried to understand what had happened. A maid explained that he had been standing beside King Panin's bed and talking to him. Then without warning he suddenly collapsed and lost consciousness. She added that everyone had been very worried. Colonel was still unsure about everything. He apologized for causing trouble and asked if King Panin had said anything after he fell. The maid said she did not fully understand the king's words. She only remembered that the king said he had not moved at all, and that his successor would be able to do the same. Colonel left the church and walked through the city to clear his mind. As he walked, he kept thinking and tried to understand what had happened. If the king had not moved, then it might have been an illusion, but that did not feel right. Illusions usually gave small signs such as a strange smell or a change in temperature. He had not noticed anything like that. He looked at the helmet in his hands and thought more carefully. One of the king's techniques had frozen his body with paralyzing poison. He was sure of that, but he questioned the terrifying power he had seen, the large sphere filled with screaming spirits. He wondered if that had been an illusion too. He considered that it might have been only a partial illusion, but he forced himself to stop thinking about it. The more he tried to understand, the more confused he became. He also thought about the chance that the king had used more than one technique. As he continued walking, he reached a different thought that made him uneasy. Maybe it was not about the king's power. Maybe the problem was him. He had been weak. He had panicked. He had not been able to think clearly. He realized he had been too excited when he was chosen as the next Holy Knight. He had not taken the time to think about what that role truly meant. Even if his path was already set, he still felt worried about the future. He understood that this feeling was normal. As he walked, he suddenly sensed something strange. He turned a corner, walked a little farther, and stopped in a quiet, narrow alley. Without looking back, he already knew someone was behind him. Several men stood there holding daggers. One of them laughed cruelly. They had no personal reason to target him, but they still planned to kill him. They believed he should not have been walking alone. Colonel closed his eyes. The king had not said much earlier, but that moment had still taught him something. The attackers kept talking and said that many people would be happy if he disappeared. One of them even asked for forgiveness before acting. Colonel stayed still and felt that this was happening again. He knew he lacked experience, just as the king had pointed out. He closed his eyes and walked straight toward them. With each step he swung his sword with simple movements. Within seconds the fight ended, and the attackers were defeated. He thought about how he needed to train harder. He had to grow stronger and become the guardian when the king was gone. He would one day inherit the country and protect it with his power. Soon after, several soldiers rushed into the alley with a report. When they saw the scene, they were shocked and asked what had happened. Colonel calmly said he had been attacked again and asked them to handle the situation. He then asked about the report. The soldiers explained that it was about the expeditionary team. Colonel was shocked to learn that they had lost contact with Stringer. The entire unit seemed to have disappeared. Colonel reacted quietly. To him, this was just another problem. He ordered the soldiers to send a message to the commander. Then he decided that he would go there himself. He believed this might become his greatest trial. Back in the village's abandoned church, Guy touched the crystal. He welcomed the being inside and used a spell to release it. The crystal shattered into many pieces, and a bright light flashed. Guy and his monster companions watched as something came out. A humanoid dragon appeared in front of them. It dropped to its knees and looked at its hands. It felt confused. It remembered being on a bus and an accident happening. It believed it should have died. The dragon felt lost. It did not know if it was alive or dead. Nothing made sense. It looked at its body and saw long claws and rough scales. It also noticed a tail behind it. Panic filled its mind as it realized it had turned into a creature like a lizard. The others were surprised as they watched the dragon struggle to understand what was happening. Lin the skeleton said this reaction was normal. Guy agreed and said everyone went through this at the start. He thought they should find out who the dragon was. At the same time, the dragon pinched its cheek to check if it was dreaming. A floating black eye monster moved in front of it and tried to ask who it was. The dragon froze when it heard a familiar language. When the black eye monster asked again, the dragon attacked it and sent it flying. The dragon became more scared and tried to keep everyone away. It believed they might try to eat it. The dragon kept swinging its fists to protect itself. It did not understand anything, but it was determined to survive. It did not want to die again. The black eye monster crashed to the ground and felt pain. It realized the dragon was very strong. Guy moved closer and tried to calm the dragon. He avoided the attacks and tried to speak to it. The dragon rushed toward the golem and attacked, but it had no effect. The golem grabbed the dragon with both hands and held it tightly. The dragon felt frustrated but refused to give up. Then the dragon used a new ability called Dragon's Breath. It released a large stream of fire at the golem. The golem was surprised and let go. The dragon flew into the air to escape. Suddenly spiderwebs wrapped around its body. It tried to break free, but the more it moved, the tighter the web became. Below, the spider girl and Guy stood watching. They said they had caught it and told it to stop. The black eye monster flew in again and used a spell to weaken the dragon. The dragon roared as its body stopped moving. It fell from the air and hit the ground hard. Guy walked up to the dragon and called out to him. He said they were not enemies. He pointed at him, smiled, and reminded him that they had been classmates. The dragon slowly turned his head and looked at him in shock. Guy pointed at himself and told him to look more closely. The dragon looked again, and his eyes grew wide. He realized the young man in front of him was Guy. The dragon broke free from the web, sat on the ground, and let out a deep sigh. He clicked his tongue and thought that he still could not get away from Guy even in another world. Guy then said it was time for them to introduce themselves. Even though the dragon looked different, Guy could still tell who he was. There was an X-shaped scar on the dragon's forehead. The dragon slowly stood up and laughed. He had expected Guy to recognize him. He then revealed who he was. He was Class 100 student number 10, known as the Furious Roar Assault Captain, Storm Glen. He was Takahashi Gorin. Back in their old world, Takahashi Gorin was a self-proclaimed Yankee who believed he was the strongest person in the region. He enjoyed fighting and often got into trouble. He always tried to prove he was better than everyone else. On his way to becoming the strongest, only one person stood in his way: Guy. For the first time, Gorin tried to force Guy into a fight, but Guy refused. Gorin stepped closer and tried to provoke him by suggesting that he was scared. Guy ignored him, did not even look at him, and waved him off. He explained that his grandfather had forbidden him from using fighting techniques in street fights. Gorin did not understand this and felt confused. Gorin then remembered his grandfather's words. The techniques he learned in their family dojo were never meant for pointless fights. His grandfather only agreed to train him if he promised to use them responsibly. Because of that promise, Guy decided to leave. He stood up, walked toward the exit, and told Gorin that he would not fight. He then left without looking back. Gorin became frustrated and watched him go while feeling angry. One of Gorin's followers asked what they should do next. Gorin clenched his teeth and insisted that he would never give up. Gorin had already won many jujitsu, karate, and kendo tournaments. He was known as the strongest student in their school. Gorin believed that if he could defeat Guy, he would become the true strongest, not just in name but in reality. Even so, Guy still refused to fight. Because of this, Gorin kept bothering Guy almost every day. Sometimes he knelt with his followers and begged him directly. Other times he suggested drawing lots so that if Guy's name was chosen, he would have to fight. He even staged pretend fights with his followers to show how exciting it could be. At one point, he even offered Shohei Ohtani's autograph in exchange for a fight. He kept trying different ways to convince Guy, but Guy stayed uninterested the entire time. Gorin finally came up with a new plan. He met Guy alone in an abandoned gym, and the two of them shook hands in a firm grip. Guy looked surprised and asked why he had been called to the old school building. Gorin laughed in a mocking way and explained that he had a proposal. Since Guy could not use his hands and feet properly in a fight, Gorin suggested that they settle things with a strength contest using only their heads. He believed this would allow Guy to keep his promise. To make fun of the idea, Gorin even tapped his own forehead. Guy laughed and noticed that Gorin had changed his approach. He was slightly impressed by Gorin's stubborn attitude, but he still agreed to the challenge. Gorin was shocked and asked if he was serious. Before he could react, Guy suddenly moved forward and headbutted him hard. Gorin staggered backward, caught completely off guard. Guy then said that Gorin should attack properly and added that if Gorin lost, he should never bother him again. Gorin straightened himself, sighed, and told Guy not to hold back. After that, the two of them began fighting. For several minutes, heavy hits, shouts, and groans echoed through the empty gym. In the end, Gorin fell flat on the floor and lost for the first time in his life. Back in the present, they were in another world where everyone had turned into monsters. Gorin realized that they had all been reborn in different forms. He looked at his former classmates and angrily asked why everyone had become monsters. One by one, they introduced their new forms. Takaya Guyama from the weightlifting club had become a golem. Tanaka Masayuki from the astrology club had become an evil eye. Yuan Linli Chen from the martial arts club had turned into a skeleton champion. Amahara Satoshi from the handicrafts club had become an arachnia. Guy told Gurren to remember their new species names, but Gurren did not care and roared in frustration. He then demanded to know why Guy was the only one who remained human. Guy paused and explained that he did not know the reason and had simply woken up in that form. Gurren felt angry and said that Guy was lucky, adding that he would have preferred to stay human as well. Guy calmly replied that it was not luck since being human in that world was not necessarily a good thing. Gurren was left confused by those words. At that moment, Amahara called out to them. The dragon turned and saw her swinging between trees using her webs. She moved around with excitement and told them to watch. She said her monster body felt great and was very quick. She also said that humans could not move like that, but monsters could do much more. Gurren crossed his arms and watched her with unease. Guy touched his chin as he observed her and thought her body was well suited for survival in that world. Then he looked at Gurren. Gurren had already become much stronger than a normal human. He had just breathed fire, but it seemed he had forgotten that. The dragon looked at his hands, which were clenched into fists as if thinking, then he suddenly grabbed Guy and threw him to the ground. Guy shouted in panic and asked what was going on. Gurren growled in a threatening way and said Guy was right. In their old world he could not defeat him, but in this world things were different. The dragon showed a dark smile and asked if Guy was giving up. Guy struggled as he held onto the dragon's claws. He groaned and told him not to get overconfident. He trembled, but then the situation quickly changed. Guy pressed his blade against Gurren's neck and pinned him down. Gurren panicked upon sensing Guy's killing intent. He said he understood and that it had only been a joke. After they both calmed down, the dragon asked how a normal human had managed to throw such a large dragon. Guy realized what he had done and apologized. He looked at his sword and said he had decided that he would never lose again. Later, all the former high school students, now turned into monsters, gathered around a large campfire. Guy explained how he had woken up in a strange world. Gurren felt surprised when he learned that Guy had found his twin sister first and called him lucky. Gurren tried to remember her name, but Guy stopped him and said it was Mew, then continued his story. Guy said his sister had escaped from a crystal by herself. That was when he understood that he was no longer in his original world. His sister was no longer a normal human. After that, they stayed together and moved as a pair. Soon after, they were attacked. A group of vampires captured Guy, forced his arms behind his back and stopped him from escaping. Their leader knocked his sister unconscious and carried her away. Guy struggled and tried to break free, but the vampires were too strong. The leader wore a tailcoat and had light curly hair that reached his shoulders. He showed a proud smile and ignored Guy. He introduced himself as Dande, the Lord of Vampires, and claimed that he had finally found his bride. He said his bloodline had been waiting for this moment for over 1,000 years. Then he spread his wings, flew into the air, and held the girl tightly. The other vampires asked what to do with Guy. Dande laughed and told them to throw him into the valley. Guy reached out toward his sister and called her name, hoping she would wake up. The vampires ignored him. Soon after, he fell off a cliff and lost consciousness. In the end, Mew was taken away. In this world, she had been reborn as a vampire queen. In the present, Guy cursed and hit the ground with his fists. His body shook with anger. He believed that if he had been stronger, his sister would not have been taken. He also questioned why he did not have powers like the others. Gurren said he now understood what had happened. After their grandfather died, Mew had been Guy's only family. Guy stayed quiet and nodded. Guy then thought about their next step. There was only one clue, but he believed he would find the group and rescue his sister, even if it cost his life. His classmates looked at him with sympathy. Lin, the skeleton champion, explained that this world also had the armies of the Holy Kingdom. They called beings like them sealed monsters and wanted to destroy them. Tanaka, the evil eye, said it was impossible to reason with them and believed any armed group they met would likely belong to the Holy Kingdom. He also wondered why they hated monsters so much. Amahara, the Arachnia, explained that it was because the Holy Kingdom followed a strict religion and people there feared anything they saw as unholy. Guy focused again and spoke with determination. He decided they needed to think carefully and act smarter than their enemies. They had to move ahead of the Holy Kingdom's forces, rescue their allies, and grow stronger. Class 2C had no allies in this harsh world. He thought deeply. He did not expect complete safety, but he still hoped they could find a place where both monsters and humans could live in peace. Guy was suddenly interrupted by a strange sound from the forest. A small girl ran quickly through the bushes. She had pointed ears, a light silver tiara in her hair, and a fine dress. Behind her, footsteps kept getting closer. Two men chased her while riding large boar-like beasts. They believed they would get a big reward if they caught her, so they did not want her to escape. The girl felt panic as she realized they were about to catch her. In her mind, she begged for help. She soon reached an open area. A bonfire burned there, and several people sat around it. She cried out for help in fear. Everyone turned to look at her. The girl froze, her eyes wide, and then fainted. Guy rushed to her and checked if she was okay. Tanaka and Gurren began to argue about who had scared her more, while Lin tried to calm them down. Guy looked annoyed and told everyone to hide because someone was coming. Soon the two men arrived at the clearing on their large beasts. Guy sat alone holding the unconscious girl. The men ordered him to hand her over and raised their weapons when he did not respond. Guy thought they were too quick to fight. Then Tanaka appeared behind them and used a charm spell. He calmed the boars and reminded them of their wild past when humans were their prey. Seconds later, the men were thrown off their mounts. The boars turned on them and attacked. Tanaka controlled the beasts with quiet words. The men were confused and tried to fight back, but they failed. After a few minutes, the boars left the bodies behind and returned to the forest. Tanaka walked up to Guy and said his power had worked well. Guy felt sorry for the young men, thinking they had not lived much of their lives. Gurren said it reminded him of scenes from movies where pigs were used to dispose of bodies. Tanaka found the idea strange but still laughed. They went back to the campfire. Gurren asked about the girl, and Guy said Amahara was taking care of her. They gathered around to look. Amahara said the girl was only asleep. When they looked closer, they noticed her long ears and began to wonder if she was truly an elf. Soon after, the elf girl woke up and saw monsters in front of her. Amahara noticed and said she was finally awake. The elf panicked and screamed. She pressed herself against a tree and tried to make herself as small as possible. Guy walked toward her. He thought it was normal for someone to be scared when seeing a group of monsters together. He believed it made sense for a young elf girl to feel afraid. He calmly told her he was a monster tamer. The girl, still shaking, asked if he was telling the truth. Guy nodded with confidence. He gestured toward the others and explained that the monsters were his friends. He said they followed him and were actually kind, even if they looked scary. The elf slowly stood up and bowed her head. She apologized for being afraid. She explained that it was her first time meeting a monster tamer. Guy laughed a little and waved his hand. He said he was not upset and that it was normal for her to be surprised. Then he lightly punched Gurren to show they were close. The dragon quickly got angry and growled, and the two began to argue. Gurren said he would hit Guy later. Guy argued that his punch should have hurt since Gurren had scales. The evil eye laughed at them for making a scene. The elf watched everything but did not know what to say. A human like Guy spoke with monsters as if they were friends. They argued like normal people, yet they had defeated a group from the Akabane gang with ease. She grew serious and reminded herself that she did not have much time. She needed to ask Guy for help. At the same time, Guy and the monsters stepped aside. Lin quietly asked if they really believed the girl had been the target. Guy said she looked well dressed and might be from a rich family. He thought the attackers may have planned to kidnap her for money. At that moment, the elf suddenly called out Guy's name. Everyone turned to look at her. She bowed deeply and showed him great respect, treating him like a lord of monsters. She then urged him to follow her and not ask questions. A short time later, they ran through the dark forest. Gurren stayed close to Guy and quietly complained that he could not just leave her behind. That was simply the kind of person Guy was. The girl ran a little ahead, leading the way, and did not pay attention to their talk. Guy replied that they did not even know where they were going and it was already too late to turn back. Gurren still felt uneasy and kept saying the elf girl was strange. She had rushed ahead without explaining anything, which made him uneasy. She also looked like someone from a noble family, which made him even more suspicious. Guy and Lin gave him teasing looks and suggested that even a strong dragon might feel fear. Suddenly, the elf stopped and said they had arrived. In front of them stood an old Western-style mansion deep in the forest. It looked worn down, forgotten, and covered by nature. Everyone stopped and stared at it in silence. Gurren looked surprised and thought the empty mansion looked like ruins. Without warning, a heavy rain of arrows flew toward them. Guy, who stood at the front, barely dodged and cried out in shock. Someone then appeared on the second-floor railing. They demanded to know who the strangers were and said the monsters would not be allowed to go any farther. Guy ignored most of the threats. He shook his fist and complained that one of the arrows had almost hit him. One elf in front quietly raised his bow. In a cold voice, he ordered everyone not to move. He warned them that any movement would be treated as an attack on the elven land of Susaria. Tanaka quickly flew closer to Guy and warned him to watch out for more arrows. Gurren asked in a low voice if they were ready to fight. Guy was surprised to see more elves appear. The elves did not wait long. They shouted that monsters stood before them and gave the order to shoot. At that moment, the rescued elf girl ran forward and stood in front of Guy and the monsters. She spread her arms wide to shield them with her body. She called out to the other elves and told them they were not enemies. The elven leader was surprised and lowered his bow. He called her name. She was Amin. Without stopping, Amin explained that a group from the Akabane gang had been chasing her. She said the man beside her had helped her escape. She introduced him as Guy, a monster tamer. She also asked the elves to pass her message to Lady Deirdre. She wanted to personally introduce her savior. The elves on the balcony looked at each other with tense faces. They hesitated, then slowly opened the heavy doors. A voice from inside the mansion allowed Amin to enter, but only the monster tamer could go with her. The monsters had to stay outside. Amin's ears twitched slightly as she thanked Lady Deirdre in a loud and respectful voice. Gurren stepped closer to Guy and quietly warned him that it might be a trap. He felt that going inside alone was dangerous. Tanaka stayed nearby and clearly felt the same. Guy looked at them, gave a calm smile, and told them not to worry. He said he would return soon. Before entering, Amin warned Guy to behave properly inside the mansion. Then she led him inside. Once inside, they were not welcomed warmly. Several elves who looked very similar watched them with cold eyes. Their gaze followed every move. Amine walked to the center of the large hall. She dropped to one knee, placed her hand on the floor, and bowed her head. She formally announced her arrival. Guy looked up and saw a girl sitting on a large throne. She looked exactly like Amine. Her face, hair, and sharp eyes were the same. The elf on the throne, Deirdre, spoke in a bored tone. She rested her cheek on her hand and looked down at Amine with clear displeasure. She questioned why Amine was still alive. Guy looked closer and noticed something strange. Both elves had the exact same face. Deirdre frowned and ordered Amine to answer in a stern voice. Amine fell to her knees. Her body shook and tears ran down her face. She said she had been scared when Abine's gang chased her. She said she had not been thinking clearly at the time. Her voice broke as she spoke. Abine became more emotional and begged for forgiveness. Fear took over her. She admitted that while being chased, she realized she did not want to die. She believed she had done something unforgivable. Deirdre stood up from her throne and walked over to Amine. Without warning, she hit Amine on the head with the heel of her shoe. She was furious and accused Amine of forgetting her role as a decoy. She treated her harshly and showed no mercy. She then took out her whip and struck Amine again and again. Amine cried in pain and tried to apologize while covering her head. Tridra continued in anger and explained what had happened in Caesarea. A coup had taken place, and the king had been killed. The rebel leader Gillian had taken control of the royal castle and sent his men to hunt down the remaining royal family. After a short pause, Tridra spoke in a colder tone. Most of her relatives had already been captured and only a few were still alive. Her father had been killed, and survival had become the most important thing. She kept striking Amine and explained that Amine's only purpose was to act as her double. She was meant to be captured to give Tridra time to escape. Tridra raised her hand to strike again, but Guy stopped her by grabbing her arm. She quickly turned and glared at him. Guy held her wrist and told her to calm down. He said the situation was serious, but it was not right to blame everything on Amine. Tridra became even angrier and demanded that he let go. Her guards stepped forward and blocked him with their swords. Guy released her, stepped back, and showed that he did not mean any harm. Deirdre looked at him with irritation and asked who he was. Amine, still crying, explained that Guy and his monsters were strong and could help them. Deirdre looked at Guy again. She had heard that he was a monster tamer. She said he should think carefully before acting and should not bring strangers into a dangerous situation without understanding it. She then asked Amine if she knew who had been chasing her. Amine confirmed that she did. She explained that it was the Akabane gang, a group of 7 powerful thieves who were gift holders. They had once defeated the army of the nation of Gransel, and Gillian had been dealing with them for a long time. Deirdre became upset again and said this was exactly what she had been warning about. She questioned whether an ordinary human could stand a chance against such a group. She then said there was no time left and that they had to act right away. A dagger fell onto the stone floor near Amin's knees. Deirdre coldly ordered her to end her own life. Guy reacted in shock and tried to stop her. Amine picked up the dagger with shaking hands and slowly pressed it against her throat as tears ran down her face. At that moment, a loud explosion broke the silence. The main doors were blown open. The force of the blast threw Amine backward. 3 people then entered the mansion. The elven guards stepped forward, drew their swords and demanded to know who they were. The strangers stood in the broken doorway. One was a girl with messy hair and a bold smile. Next to her stood a large bald man with 2 swords on his back and a deep cross-shaped scar on his head. Behind him was a quiet man wearing a tribal mask that covered his entire face. The bald man spoke first and acted surprised. He questioned if the elven princess had been hiding in such a place. He said they came under Gillian's orders to take her. The elves reacted with fear for the princess. Deirdre stepped forward with a serious look and recognized them as the Akabane gang. Some guards moved to protect the princess and warned the group not to come closer. They also asked what happened to the lookouts. The bald man laughed and said it had been easy to deal with the guards outside. He stated that the elves outside had been sleeping soundly. He added that the building was surrounded and no one would escape. The scarred bald man mockingly suggested that the princess should just surrender. Guy just stood there, watching what would happen next. The scarred bald man said that all the elves outside who had been guarding the mansion were already dead. The princess faltered as she spoke. She questioned how that could be true. The bandit smiled and calmly explained that if she went with them willingly, they would not harm her and would let her live. He added that once they handed Deirdre over to Gillian, their job would be done. The princess reacted with anger and refused to believe them. The woman from the trio asked why react like that when she would be spared. Deirdre believed that being captured by them was as good as death, or even worse. She knew too well how she and her relatives would end up being publicly executed to show the change in government. She couldn't allow that to happen for the sake of rebuilding Caesarea. The woman wondered what she was talking about and argued that no one would use the princess as an example. She claimed that Gillian would not do something so stupid, as it would only strengthen the opposition and turn people against him. She made it clear that the princess would be kept alive. Deirdre looked confused. The scarred bald man explained that Gillian had started a rebellion, but most people did not know much about it. He described the plan clearly. The ruler of Suzaria had been cruel and selfish, caring only about himself. The princess and Minister Gillian would be seen as heroes who stood against him. In their story, she had turned against her own father to protect her people. In the end, she would marry Gillian and rule Suzaria with him. Together, they would bring peace and justice. He believed it was the perfect outcome for everyone. As she listened, Deirdre began to shake. She reacted with anger and questioned what she had just heard. The scarred bald man insisted the plan was good and said it would keep the country from falling into chaos. Deirdre refused to accept it. The woman said the princess's opinion did not matter. She only needed to stay alive for their plan to work. The woman then showed a small dark vial and told the elf to drink it. She explained that it was a special poison called Volk poison. It would leave the princess weak and broken but still alive. All she had to do was stand beside Lord Gillian as his wife. Deirdre trembled at the thought of being seen as the leader of the rebellion and being blamed for killing her own father. She cursed them and refused to accept such a twisted plan. The scarred bald man began to laugh loudly and called her foolish. The princess questioned why he found it funny. He answered that he was impressed. She still refused to give in, which made her different. The woman pointed out that very few people were still on the princess's side. The bald man sighed, stepped forward, and said they had wasted enough time. He wanted to move on without delay. The princess raised her hand and ordered them to stay back. 3 elves suddenly appeared in front of her and moved at the same time. They worked together perfectly and swore to protect their princess from harm. They used a combined attack called Triangle Slash. 3 swords struck at once. Deirdre cheered and urged them to kill the bandits. Guy stood behind, ready to draw his sword. She felt relieved. The brothers had used this attack before and it had always defeated their enemies. She believed the bandits had no chance against 3 skilled swordsmen. If they could defeat the leader, the rest would be easy. She was determined to escape. The 3 elves rushed toward their target. Their blades moved fast. The princess watched nearby, sure they would win. But in a moment, all 3 attacks were stopped. The scarred bald man used a combat skill called 4 hands. Another pair of arms appeared from his body and blocked the swords with ease. He mocked them and said their attack was good but not enough. He pointed out that they had 3 attackers while he had 4 hands. They were at a disadvantage. The princess and the elves froze, shocked by what they saw. The bandit grinned and decided to show more. Without stopping, he used a sword technique called 4-handed Grace Moon Transformation. All 4 hands moved at once and swung their swords. The elves were cut down in an instant. He called them weak and questioned if they really thought they could defeat him, Lord D'Amato. He kept attacking, cutting their limbs and heads with ease. He laughed as he swung his swords wildly. A woman complained that D'Amato had become excited again and could not be stopped. She then told Papadi, the masked tribal man, to help the others outside for now. Guy stood still, frozen, trying to understand what was happening. He had walked into someone else's conflict by accident. These people were hunting a runaway princess and he and his monster friends were not involved at all. He paused and looked at the angry elf. He wondered if he should help the princess or stay out of it. He did not trust any of them. For a moment he thought about running away but quickly realized that was not possible. Everyone had already seen his face. The princess's loud scream cut off his thoughts. She said she was hiring him and told him to help her. Guy stayed still and looked confused. He reminded her that she had just told him not to get involved in things that were not his concern. The princess quickly said the situation had changed and that he was now hired. Guy frowned and stayed quiet. Deirdre held her chest in panic and asked what he wanted in return. She said she would do anything she could. Guy then asked for information about vampire hideouts and monster crystals. He wanted to know if the princess or her group knew anything about them. The princess agreed and pointed to the scene in front of them, where D'Amato was still attacking her people. She asked him to use his monsters to give them more time. Guy smiled and took a small cup tied to a string. He checked if his friends could hear him and gave them orders to deal with the enemies outside. He also said that anyone who wanted to could come inside and fight with him. Meanwhile, D'Amato had defeated almost all the elves. He laughed in victory and held his hands out as he slowly walked toward the princess. He mocked her and questioned if that was all her guards could do since no one else was left. Deirdre shouted at him to stop and not come any closer. D'Amato only grinned and said she clearly hated him. He then added that breaking strong women and making them submit was something satisfying. At that moment, Guy stepped in and blocked his path while complimenting his work. D'Amato was surprised and questioned who Guy was. Guy stayed calm and said that since the princess had just hired him, he should introduce himself. He said his name was Guy. D'Amato rushed forward in anger and warned him to move or be killed. His attack almost landed, but Guy did not move. He looked bored and apologized. He calmly said that he would not be the one fighting him. Suddenly, the ceiling collapsed above them. Dust and debris filled the air. From the smoke, the dragon Gurren appeared and roared loudly. He said he was tired of waiting outside and was ready to act. The 2 bandits stared at the dragon in shock. Gurren moved closer to Guy and kept his eyes on the enemies. He asked if they were the targets. Guy agreed and pointed out that the man with the beard and scar looked like the leader. D'Amato let out a breath and then laughed, saying he had almost been scared. His partner laughed as well and made fun of the dragon, calling it nothing more than a large lizard. They joked about what they could even do with it and laughed even more. Gurren suddenly remembered something from his past life. A Yankee group had once mocked him in his name, treating him like he was nothing. The memory faded and he returned to the present with a cold smile. He thought that people were just as annoying in this world as his old world. He asked Guy if the enemies were underestimating him. Guy simply said that fools are the same everywhere. Gurren decided to leave the girl with Guy and face D'Amato himself. He felt their disrespect could not be ignored. If no one stopped them, people like them could harm what he cared about. He wanted them to regret what they had done. He believed some people should not be challenged, and he saw himself as one of them. With that in mind, he rushed forward. While Guy watched Gurren enter the fight, the female bandit attacked him from behind. He blocked the strike just in time. He turned to face her with a calm look and questioned her actions. The woman replied that since their partners had already fought, it was now their turn. She paused and brought up what she had heard earlier. She wondered if Guy was truly a monster tamer. Guy showed a slight smirk and questioned her back. He then said he was not in the mood to fight her. He also felt unsure about fighting a girl like her. Since he did not want to kill her, he asked if they could stop. The woman could not believe Guy did not know who Charcoal Jabi was. She found his lack of knowledge unsettling. She also did not like how relaxed he seemed. She laughed and assumed he thought they could escape through luck. She made it clear that the entire estate had already been surrounded. No one could get out, not even something as small as a mouse. At that moment, a body dropped outside, screaming in pain. Guy took a stance and said those words should be directed at her instead. He made it clear that they were the ones who would not escape the estate. Outside, the other monsters fought the rest of the bandits and overwhelmed them. A man watched the battle outside the estate while sitting on a tall tree branch. When he saw how many people had arrived, he realized the country would soon become more chaotic. Even so, he found the situation interesting. Members of the Akabane gang lay in a large pile. Unconscious bodies were stacked on top of each other like trash. Guyama had taken them all down. Tanaka then flew over him and shared that they had received a request from the elves. They planned to help defeat the bandits. Lin had already finished dealing with the enemies near the entrance. Tanaka sensed someone on the roof and wondered if he should go there. Guyama told him it was fine since Amahara was already there. Using her spider legs, Amahara tried to kick a masked bandit. Papadi moved quickly and avoided the attack. He hung from a tree branch and complained that the elves had tamed monsters. Still, he declared that he was the strongest of the Melion tribe and would not lose to monsters. He easily cut through Amahara's webs. He laughed and believed his plan was working. His voice slowly faded as he spoke. Then he disappeared from sight. Amahara looked around but could not find him. Suddenly, something flew past her. It was a hand axe and it struck a nearby tree. She noticed blood from a small cut on her cheek and felt shocked. Papadi's laughter echoed around her. He made it clear that she was being attacked by someone she could not see. He hinted that resisting would only make things worse for her. At the same time, Guy fought Jabi. As their blades clashed, Guy felt lucky to face a member of the Akabane gang. Jabi seemed to enjoy the fight as she attacked with many quick strikes. Guy blocked every one of them. Jabi was surprised that a monster tamer could fight so well with a sword. Guy accepted the remark. However, Jabi believed the result would not change. She claimed their missions always succeeded and that this fight would end the same way. She showed him the markings on her left arm. She explained that each line stood for a person she had killed, and she had stopped counting after 200. She believed Guy would be added next and saw it as an honor for him. She then told him to look closely at his monster companion. Gurren cursed as he struggled to breathe. Guy asked if he was okay. Gurren told him not to worry but admitted this fight was not what he expected. D'Amato laughed and asked what he meant. He mocked Gurren, saying it was foolish for a lizard like him to think he could win. Still, D'Amato also admitted the fight was not what he expected either. Without warning, D'Amato attacked again with his forearms. Gurren could only defend himself. D'Amato complained that he could not cut through the lizard man's scales. Then he laughed and decided to use more of his power. He let out a loud scream. Veins showed all over his body as he activated his skill, Indestructible Strength. His muscles grew bigger. In a single move, he sent Gurren flying. Gurren felt the impact and coughed up blood. Guy called out to him in worry. While Guy was distracted, Jabi attacked. She threw her daggers toward him. Guy blocked them with his arm guard. But as soon as he knocked them away, Jabi grabbed his arm. A sudden explosion filled the mansion. The people outside were shocked. The place where Guy stood blew up, and his body was burned black. Jabi explained that it was because of her blessing, gunpowder creation. D'Amato laughed and said he expected that from her. Guy's body was badly burned. Jabi said it was an easy win for her. D'Amato added that the lizard man was no match for him. He then turned to Deirdre and suggested they leave. Deirdre could not believe what was happening. She did not expect the monsters to fail so easily. Her last knight told her to step back. He swore to protect her with his life as the captain of the royal guards. The final fight was about to begin. Earlier, while Guy and the others were camping, Gurren asked how this world was different from their old one. Tanaka said the biggest difference was guilt. On Earth, even bad people would hesitate to kill. But in this world, people have become like monsters. He found it strange. He believed that life had very little value here. He wondered if they were slowly being affected by this world. He told Gurren that he would soon understand. Gurren did not know what to think. Back on Earth, he could fight people many times, but he never thought about killing. Tanaka said that in this world it was kill or be killed. Gurren wondered if he could really live like that. Back in the present, Gurren realized it was never about justice. That idea belonged to this new world. D'Amato was caught off guard when he turned around. Gurren did not care about the elven princess or her people. He did not even care if his friends died. He only found the bald man in front of him annoying. Gurren stood up again. He wondered if D'Amato was the strongest bandit around. Then he decided to tear him apart. He said that D'Amato was nothing special. He pulled himself up using the wall with his claws. D'Amato and Jabi were shocked that he was still alive. D'Amato could not understand it. He had used his full power, boosted many times by his skill, but he had not even scratched Gurren. Gurren walked toward him in a slow and threatening way. D'Amato got ready to fight again with his 4 arms. He realized Gurren was not a normal lizardman. Gurren's claws grew longer and sharper as he attacked. It was his first time using the dragon claws technique. In one quick strike, he cut off D'Amato's arms as easily as slicing cucumbers. Blood burst out from the wounds. D'Amato cried out in pain. He was also confused that a lizardman could use such a skill. Jabi could not believe that D'Amato had been defeated so easily. Gurren saw her as weak. He became angry and told the hidden figure to stop pretending to be asleep. Guy then appeared behind Jabi. His face was half burned, still recovering from earlier. He cursed at her. Jabi was shocked and asked how he was still alive. She thought she had killed him. Guy kicked her hard in the stomach. She fell and rolled across the ground, crashing into D'Amato. Guy then gave Gurren a signal. Gurren took a deep breath. Guy said it was time to finish the bandits together. Gurren opened his mouth wide and aimed at the 2 bandits. He used another dragon skill called Blue Dragon Breath. Blue flames burst out and hit them at close range. They screamed in fear as the fire swallowed them. In moments, both of them were burned by the flames. Smoke came out of Gurren's mouth as he asked Guy if he had seen what just happened. He showed his true attack, the Blue Dragon Breath, which left nothing behind. The 2 bandits had disappeared without a trace. There were no bodies, not even ashes. Guy could not speak. Gurren then said that this was his current power. Deirdre called out to them and praised them for destroying the worst bandit group. She realized that even a monster tamer should not be taken lightly. Guy pointed out that she had also suffered a lot. As her dead subordinates were scattered around the mansion, he felt relieved that she was still alive. Deirdre said that as long as she lived, the royal bloodline still had value. If she died, the Elven dynasty would end. She treated the loss of her subordinates as something small. Gurren could not believe she said that in front of their bodies. Guy quietly told him that this might be normal for royalty. The princess then turned to the surviving elves and told them to prepare to leave at once and meet her father. Guy asked her to give the information about the vampires or the sealing crystal. Deirdre paused for a moment and then smiled in a cold way. She said she knew nothing about them. Guy and Gurren were shocked. Guy grew angry and asked what she meant after promising information. Deirdre explained that she never actually said she had that information. Guy realized they had been tricked. Deirdre said she had also been desperate, so she decided to change the reward to money instead. She reminded them that she would do anything to survive and take back Susaria as a royal. At that moment, another elf stabbed her from behind. The blade went through her small body. The other elf, Guy and Gurren, were shocked. Deirdre felt confused as blood came out of her mouth. She turned and saw that it was Gandahal, the head knight. The elven mage grew angry and demanded to know what Gandahal was doing. He then cast spears of ice. The spears hit Gandahal's body and dropped him to the ground. The mage rushed to the princess and cried out in pain. He could not believe that Gandahal had betrayed them after serving them for so long. As Gandahal lay in his own blood, he explained that he did everything for his daughter. He said his daughter had died while acting as the princess's body double. He could not accept that his only child had died that way. Because of this, he swore revenge on the princess. He planned an assassination to avoid harming others. He gave information to the bandits and tried to have her killed, but she survived. After that, he decided to end the royal bloodline himself. He told them they should be grateful to him. Soon after, he died. The elven mage was shocked by the truth. He had believed that Gandahal became more devoted to his duty after his daughter died with honor. He never thought Gandahal had been thinking this way. Seeing the scene in front of her, someone realized it had been her mistake for not understanding the simple feelings of her own kin. The elven girl from earlier, who had been knocked out before, stood up and bowed. She apologized to Amin. Guy and Gurren were confused. The dying princess reached out her hand to the elven girl. She said there was no need to apologize. She was glad she had been able to help Lady Deirdre. It was then revealed that the dying princess was not the real one but a body double named Amin. The real princess was the quiet girl from before. Deirdre thanked Amin and promised to keep living for her. She said she would take care of everything related to their family. She cried as she held Amin's hand tightly. Gaidra stayed silent until Daedra spoke to him. She apologized for dragging them into their problems and confirmed that she was the real Daedra. After wiping her tears, she explained that they thought they had escaped Caesarea safely, but their location had been exposed. She believed there was a traitor among their close aides. Because of this, she and Amin had switched places during their escape. Guy realized that Gandahal had not known about this plan. Deirdre apologized again and urged them to leave before more enemies arrived. She swore that the sacrifices made to protect her would not be wasted. She promised to live on for them. After that, Guy and the others escorted the surviving elves to a town where they had allies. At that time, Guy did not expect that they would form a long-term bond with the elves. They still had no clues about their missing classmates. Then they heard about something that had appeared in a nearby trading city. Since monsters could not enter the town, Guy went alone. He walked to the town square and looked closely at what stood there. A large crystal stood in the open. When he saw the shape inside, he thought it might be another humanoid like him. He looked around to check for soldiers but saw none. Taking the chance, he placed his hand on the crystal and used a release spell. The crystal cracked open and a girl came out. Guy was shocked when he recognized her as his childhood friend Akina. She came out of the crystal with her eyes closed and no clothes on. Akina Soraka was a high school student who lost her life in a bus accident during a school trip. She thought it was very unlucky to die so young. She hoped her parents and little brother did not lose their minds from the shock. Aside from her family, she had another regret. When she was younger, a kindergartner named Guy was bullied by other kids. The sand tunnels he made in the sandbox were destroyed. As he cried, a little girl ran toward the bullies and kicked them. She told them to stop picking on someone weaker. When they saw Akina, the boys ran away. She said she was a hero of justice, and that evil should not be forgiven. Guy called her strong and amazing. He said he wanted to marry a strong girl like her. Akina blushed and said she did not like weak boys. Guy felt sad. This was a memory from when Akina and Guy were children. It was something she barely remembered. Time passed and something happened before the bus accident. One day, Akina went to the shopping district with her friends. They were enjoying a normal day out when some men started bothering them. The men kept pushing and did not stop. Things got worse when a van pulled up beside them. The men tried to force the girls into the vehicle. Akina was used to fighting, so she tried to resist. Then she saw that one of the men had a knife. She froze. She did not expect them to have a weapon. The man pointed the knife at her and told her to stay quiet. Faced with real danger, she could not move. Her friends did not know what to do. For the first time, Akina gave in to fear. She felt angry and helpless. She wondered where they would be taken and what would happen to them. The thought filled her with fear. Then something unexpected happened inside the van. Guy was already there. He said he was sorry for stepping in and sat calmly as if he belonged there. Akina was shocked to see him. One of the men asked who he was and told him to get out. Guy said he wanted to stay for the ride but stepped out anyway. As he got out, he kicked one man in the face and knocked him down. Another man tried to attack him, but Guy caught his arm and threw him into the van. The man slammed into the door. Guy acted as if it were nothing. The man with the knife asked who Guy was and swore he would kill him. He said he had been to juvenile detention many times and claimed he was not bluffing. He rushed at Guy, trying to stab him. Guy said it would not be a game anymore if a weapon were used. He calmly stepped on the man's right foot and grabbed the arm holding the knife. He told him not to wave it around. Then Guy headbutted him. The man's face took the hit, and his teeth and sunglasses flew off. The man cried out, saying his nose was crushed. Guy grabbed him by the neck and asked what he should break next. He thought about breaking a hand or a leg. The man became terrified and ran away, leaving his friends behind. Guy laughed and said they were all just bluffing and acting tough. Guy then turned to Akina and asked if she was okay. Akina stood still, blushing. Guy had saved her. It was the same Guy she used to know as a crybaby. She had not thought much about him since they were kids. Now she felt surprised, and her chest felt tight. She struggled to speak as she thanked him. Her friends blushed and called Guy cool. After that, Akina could not look Guy in the eye. This made Guy think he had done something wrong. Akina decided to wait for the right moment. She tried to ignore him, but she kept remembering what he said when they were young about marrying a strong girl like her. She wondered if he still meant it. She wanted to confess to him to find out. A month later, an accident stopped her from telling him how she felt. Her feelings drifted into nothing. She stayed in darkness until a sudden sense of life appeared. The darkness turned into light. She regained consciousness at the moment the crystal shattered. Guy was shocked when he saw his childhood friend come out of the crystal. As Akina fell toward him, he called out her name. She slowly opened her eyes and recognized his voice. She wondered why she was still alive. When she saw Guy in front of her, she became emotional. She cried and rushed into his arms. She was amazed that he was alive too. Guy confirmed it. Akina believed it was a miracle, but she still remembered what had happened before. She wondered if they had been brought back to life, and Guy confirmed that as well. He said he would explain everything later. For now, he told her they were in a different world, not Earth. This shocked Akina. Guy explained that the culture was completely different and that it truly was another world. Still, he was sure of one thing. Akina was alive. He also said that the others were alive. He mentioned Amahara, Tanaka, Goyama, Lin, and even Guren. Akina was shocked and started crying again. She felt happy knowing she could see everyone again. After a moment she stopped crying because she wanted to find them. She suggested they keep moving. Guy then took off his cloak and told her to wear it. Akina felt confused and looked down. Guy told her she was not wearing any clothes. She became shocked and hit him. She scolded him for not telling her sooner and called him a pervert for seeing her like that. Guy felt how unfair the situation was. He then suggested they find clothes for her first. Outside the town, Amahara told someone to stop insisting. Papadi was kneeling in front of her. He said it had been his lifelong wish to meet someone who could see through his technique, and Amahara was the first to do it. Amahara repeated that she did not need any subordinates. Papadi begged her to think again. He said his species trusted their mimicry skills, and he was the strongest among them. He showed his real face, which he had never revealed before. He was a bipedal chameleon. Seeing how serious he was, Amahara explained what had happened. She said it was a simple trick. She had spread thin threads around the area, so when Papadi touched them she knew where he was. His mimicry did not work on her. Papadi trembled in amazement. He bowed again and asked to serve her. Lin commented on how persistent he was. Guren wondered what was going on with him. Tanaka lay on the ground and looked at the sky. He told Guren to look up and pointed out that the planet had 2 moons and 2 suns. As a member of the astronomy club, he felt honored to see a binary star system up close. Guren could not look because the light was too bright, and he asked if this was unusual. Tanaka said it was not that rare. He explained that many stars were part of binary systems. With magic and monsters in this world, he thought that might explain the difference from Earth. He said it was easy to tell that this was not the same world they knew. It was a completely new place. Guren then wondered if Tanaka's eyes hurt from looking at the suns. Tanaka said he felt fine. Guren guessed it was because of Tanaka's new body. Tanaka said being an evil eye was perfect for him because he could keep watching the stars. Guren was glad to hear that, but he still wondered what was happening with Guy, who had gone off alone. Guy and Akina went to a tavern to rest. While they were there, Akina learned about different species. Guy pointed out that her earlier punch had been very strong. He said that if he had been a normal person, he could have died from it. Akina became embarrassed and told him not to call her strength that way. She then asked how she could figure out what kind of species she was. Guy said it was simple. He told her to close her eyes and think about it. He explained that animals knew how to hunt, eat, and survive without being taught because it was part of them. Monsters were the same. They naturally understood what they were and what they could do. Guy watched her quietly for a few minutes until she opened her eyes. He asked if she had learned anything. Akina suddenly stood up and opened her cloak. Guy was shocked and quickly looked away, assuming she was naked. He asked what she was doing. Surprisingly, Akina was wearing a school uniform. Guy felt both surprised and confused and wondered why she had it on. Akina looked down, her eyes filling with tears. She realized that she might not be human anymore. Guy became serious when he saw the worried look on his childhood friend's face. He said he understood. To him, she still looked like a normal human. But just as he had expected, this meant Akina was no different from the others. A child suddenly walked up to Akina and said her clothes looked cute. Akina was surprised for a moment, then thanked the child. The child's mother quickly told her not to bother them. The father apologized to both Akina and Guy. Guy laughed and said that their school uniforms probably looked strange in this world. After that, Akina went back to her seat and felt down. Guy asked what was wrong and if she was hungry. He told her to order anything she wanted. He pointed out that even the juice was made from a fruit that did not exist in their old world. He wanted her to try it so she could understand that they were truly in a different world. Akina gathered her courage and asked if he would still like her even if she was no longer human. Guy wondered if she meant she had turned into a monster. Akina was shocked that he already knew. Guy did not understand why she was so worried, which confused her. He then explained that she was not the only one. Everyone else had also turned into monsters, except him. He shared that Guiyama had become a stone person. Amahara had turned into a spider-like woman, and Tanaka had become a one-eyed creature that looked like an octopus. Akina was shocked to hear this. Guy also said they were called sealed monsters and were being hunted by the Holy Kingdom. Because of this, they needed as much strength as they could get. He made it clear that he would never hate her. Instead, he accepted her. Akina asked if he truly meant that. Guy thought it would take time for her to accept her new body, but he believed she would get used to it soon. Guy tried to ask what kind of monster Akina was, but someone suddenly caused a scene inside the tavern. The owner was shocked when he saw who had entered. A swordsman with slanted eyes and an evil smile walked in with 3 companions. They looked like a rogue, a tank, and a mage. The owner quickly bowed and asked the swordsman, Jimenez, why he had come to the tavern. The other customers grew nervous as soon as they saw him. Guy did not understand what was happening, but he noticed how tense the room became. Jimenez told the owner to bring out the best food and drinks they had. The owner hesitated and asked if they could pay first before ordering. Jimenez pointed his sword at the owner's neck and laughed. He warned the owner to be careful with his words if he wanted to stay alive. He made it clear they would not be paying for anything. Frightened for his life, the owner agreed to serve them for free. Soon the group was given the best food and drinks in the tavern. One customer quietly wondered who they were to act so proud. Another customer warned him to stay silent. He explained that Jimenez and his group were A-ranked adventurers known as the Dragon Wings. Jimenez was their leader and also the son of the region's lord. Because they were strong and had special powers, no one dared to oppose them. Anyone who went against them would be killed. If they chose a target, that person would not survive. It was safer to avoid eye contact and wait until they left. The fat leader of the group said that women were the best reward after a long day of hard work. He called a waitress over and planned to take her to the inn later. The tavern owner tried to stop him because he was afraid the man would hurt another waitress. The fat man then turned his attention to a mother he had noticed earlier. The woman's husband stepped in and said they were married and had children. The fat man became angry that a common person was speaking back to someone he considered a noble. He attacked the husband, punching him hard and knocking him unconscious. Guy then realized what was happening. After that, the fat man grabbed the woman by her hair and started dragging her away. Another member of the group made a dark comment about how difficult it was to deal with Lagos at night. It was also said that Lagos was known for abusing women during sex. The rogue of the group added that Lagos had killed too many women that he was banned from all brothels. The other customers in the tavern began to feel sorry for the woman. Lagos then tried to assault the woman and acted in a disturbing way toward her. He claimed he had prepared a substance that would make her feel good later, but she felt disgusted and feared for her safety. She called out for help as the situation became worse. Someone suddenly kicked Lagos on the head. He was surprised and swung his arm out in reaction, which knocked the woman's child away and made him let go of the woman. The child stood in front of her mother and told Lagos to leave while calling him a villain. She told him not to bully her mother. Lagos became annoyed and kicked the child away like she was a ball, knocking her unconscious. The woman quickly went to her child and hugged her. She begged for mercy and asked them to spare her child. Jimenez refused her request and began to draw his sword. He said that violence against nobles was a very serious crime and should be punished with immediate execution. Since he represented the town and acted for the region's lord, he said he would judge them. He planned to cut off the woman's limbs so she could not escape and then burn her at a stake. With an excited and cruel expression, he swung his sword toward the woman and her child. Everyone, including Guy, was shocked by what happened next. Akina stepped in front of Jimenez and stopped his sword with her hand while glaring at him. This made Jimenez unsure and he stepped back slightly. Akina continued to glare and said she could not just watch what was happening. Guy tried to stop her, but she apologized and said she could not stay silent about such unfair actions. She said she did not care if they were adventurers or not, but she could not accept them bullying a child. She called them cowardly and pathetic for only picking on the weak. Jimenez laughed and asked the others if the girl knew who they were. He said her death sentence had already been decided and no one should interfere. He also warned them to be careful with Akina. He believed she might have a special blessing since she had blocked his sword with her bare hands. He then turned back to Akina and said she was also guilty for protecting a criminal. He stated that she would be executed as well. The kid woke up and worriedly looked for Akina. Akina told the mother and child to run away. She thanked the kid for praising her earlier and said it made her happy. Meanwhile, Jimenez ordered his men to secure the area and not let anyone escape. In this world, adventurers were ranked by strength. D, E, and F rank adventurers were mostly ordinary people who did not fight monsters and did small jobs. C rank and above were nobles who were waiting for blessings and were the ones who could fight monsters. High-rank adventurers like A and S rank had powerful abilities beyond normal humans. Suddenly, Akina's fingertips stretched and became sharp like thin blades. The mage said he did not dislike strong-willed girls, but he had no choice but to take her down. He launched an attack made of compressed air. He complained that Akina had gone too far. Akina dodged the attack and moved toward Jimenez. The large man acting as a tank stepped in front of his leader and blocked her. He laughed and said he could read her movements. He blocked her attacks with his shield and her claws eventually broke. Adventurers at A rank were strong for a reason and their skills were powerful. Jimenez then appeared beside Akina and used a sword skill. His blade cut through her easily. He said this was what happened to anyone who defied him in the town. Guy became worried for Akina. Akina's eyes widened from the pain and she coughed up blood. While in pain, she realized she had not told Guy something yet. At that moment, Jimenez suddenly frowned as a tentacle pierced his stomach. It was not an ordinary tentacle. It was connected to Akina and was part of her body. Jimenez coughed blood as he suffered internal injuries. His teammates rushed to help him. Akina saw them coming and sent a blob flying toward them. It landed on the large man's head and covered his face, suffocating him. Akina then turned her twin tails into a tentacle and pierced the rogue's head. The rogue fell dead and the large man finally realized what Akina truly was, but it was already too late. In this world, Akina had become something immune to blades and spears. She had become an ultimate greater slime.